Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Veronica Roth.
Hi there, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really excited to chat all about your writing and your books. So,
Yeah,
can
thanks for
you
having
tell
me.
me about what you've written?
Like all of the whole enchilada?
All of the books, whatever you
Okay.
feel like sharing.
Well, my career started with probably my best known work, which is Divergent, which is dystopian YA. Um, and it really that was kind of a big start to a
Mhm.
to a career, to anyone's career. But after that series was over, I wrote some YA space fantasies called Carve with Mark and The Fates Divide, and then I decided to make a little bit of a leap to adult science fiction and fantasy, where I've written some contemporary fantasy and some dystopian, like a dystopian mystery and a futuristic Antigone retelling, and I've really just gone for it. So
That's
I'm
awesome.
still operating in that space. Yeah.
What made you want to take that leap? Can you talk me through that process a bit?
Um, it was really just about paying attention to the kind of ideas that I was having. So not as intentional as it, I don't know, maybe seems like it should be, but I was just starting to become interested in other themes. And probably this has to do with like what I am trying to explore in my own mind, in my own life, as I get older. So I think that's really the reason for the jump. Um,
Mhm.
yeah,
That
not much
makes
of a jump, to be
sense.
honest.
Oh, I was just curious because you said that it was like that was a leap for you. I was wondering if that was like maybe a bigger transition, but I think I think it makes sense because as writers, what you're doing will end up reflecting kind of where you are, like emotionally and in your life. That would change over the course of your career.
Yeah, and you can really only reflect on something that you've already been through. So I think it made sense at the beginning of my career to want to think about more about adolescence, which I had just passed out of. I was 22 at that time. So the older I get, the more far away it feels.
You know, yeah, starting writing, like starting in publishing so young. How did you start? What made you know that you wanted to be a writer?
Well, I started writing every day when I was like 11 years old. I am still not really sure how that happened, but I was, an imaginative kid, so that was probably part of it. And then, as far as publishing goes, I think it feels so strange now because now I know how hard it is to get to know publishing and um, to get any traction there. But at the time, I was like, I'll just give it a try. And I didn't really think it would work. And then it did. So it's a little bit of a strange journey. But basically, I loved writing. I like the process of it a lot. I would be doing it if no one was paying me. So one like when I finally was able to finish a book, I thought, well, let's see what I can do with it. Maybe someone will pay me for it. That would be nice. And yeah, that's kind of how the transition to being traditionally published happened. I was just like, let's see.
That's interesting. When you started writing it, did you know that Divergent would be the book that you started putting out to publishers and like that was going to be a big deal for your career? Or was it just something that you're like, I'm going to try this and see, and it happened to be a fantastic novel?
Well, thanks. But no, I mean, I didn't really think about it that way. I knew that it was the best thing I had written that thus far, up until that point. And then it was a lot. There was a big leap in quality between the first book I ever finished, which I tried to get an agent for and it didn't work out. And then Divergent, it just felt different in that way. But I didn't think like this is gonna be a hit. You don't know that. And also I mean, the more you pay attention to book releases, the more you realize that, like, just because a book does well doesn't mean it's any good. Just because a book is good doesn't mean it's going to do well. So I had no like expectations based on the improved quality about how it would do. It was just a happy, a happy thing for my life, I guess. Yeah.
Mhm. Talking about your writing more in general, when you're starting a new story, do you know the length Like, are you sitting there thinking this is going to be a series? This is going to be like a novella, like your most recent thing, or a standalone? What do you have any ideas about that going in, or just see where it takes you?
I do have a sense of how long things are, and I think that develops over time. Um, but I've had a good like innate sense of it for a while. I This was a focus of um, some of my college courses, which I went to Northwestern University and I studied writing there, so I had a lot of writing courses there. And I had a professor who would try and help us to understand like the scope of an idea at the outset, which was a really interesting and useful thing to learn. Because we wrote short stories and also a novella um, in the course of that major. So that was really helpful and set me up well. Um, but sometimes you can be wrong. Like I think the biggest time that I was wrong was about Chosen Ones. I
Mhm.
really That's my first adult fantasy. Well, is it fantasy? I don't know. It's hard to explain.
Genres are made up.
It's
I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
uh, who cares? But anyway, it's like set 10 years after this group of then teenagers defeat a Dark Lord figure, and then they're like depressed adults in Chosen Ones. And I thought that that was going to be two books, and I even talked about it like, there was a sequel coming. And then the pandemic hit, and it just, I mean, I'm sure like it just upends everything. It upended the whole world. So the things that made sense to me before it didn't make sense after, and I had to kind of walk that back a little bit. So that's, I think, the biggest time I've been incorrect about how long a series was going to be.
What did your writing look like during that pandemic time, if I can ask?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I didn't write that much in the beginning. I was too anxious. I mean,
Yeah.
I also Chosen Ones came out like April of 2020, which was a terrible time to have a book come out, because not only did the world not care about it, but I didn't care. I was like, I this
Mhm.
is beside the point right now. I am buying cans of beans and wiping down my mail. So that's what I'm thinking about. Um, so I didn't write that much at the beginning. And then, as we kind of settled in a little more, I realized that my life hadn't really changed that much. I was going to see people less, but my day to day was pretty much the same. So I picked up writing again. But the book that I wrote like during that time was called Poster Girl. It's a dystopian mystery, and the tone of it is a lot more serious than a lot of my other work. It has a kind of grim quality to it. It's a little bit of a noir, so I think it works for the story. But I think I needed to go into my feelings during that
Mhm.
sort of latter pandemic time.
Yeah. I fully, yeah, totally get that, especially like with the not writing at the very beginning of it, because it was just so all-consuming that it made it really hard then. I think you hear a lot of people now saying that, but not as much when we were in the middle of it.
No, everyone was like, "We're fine. It's fine. Everything's fine." Did you
Yeah.
play Animal Crossing? Because that's what I
I
did.
did not, but everyone I knew did.
Yeah, I don't that I've never gone back to that game. It was like a very particular time. I was like, I just want to do something soothing, but not interested anymore.
I took up the hobby of listening to audiobooks but only like celebrity biographies and knitting. And I did that
Interesting.
so much in that first month, like all of my memories, I like built a blanket fort around myself and sat there listening to Tina Fey for a month.
What was the best one?
Oh, I think it might have been that first one that I like really started off on the high. I really liked Tina Fey's book Bossy Pants. I had
I
listened
liked
to it
that book
before
too.
then, but I went back to it. Yeah.
Nice.
So over the course of your career, how has your writing process changed?
Well, I mean, I think it was the Wild West when I started in my mind. I mean, I was just like, whatever works. I have no process. I have no routine. I have no understanding of what works for me and what doesn't.
Mhm.
And having to deal with the realities of the business part of it really helped shape my process, which, um, like, I suddenly realized that I needed to outline because an editor will ask you for an outline, Sometimes, if you're trying to write a series, or if you're just proposing a book as opposed to like submitting a full manuscript. And so I had to
Mhm.
learn how to do it. And then I discovered that I worked really well with that structure. I had always thought of myself as someone who was more like a free spirit with writing, but it was actually keeping me from really enjoying the stuff that I really like about writing, which is like revising. So, learning how to outline was like a creatively invigorating thing for me.
What
Um,
does an outline look like for you now?
well, for me, it starts as a big list of scenes. So just the big ones. I usually think in those like kind of set piece moments, like, oh, this will be like
Mhm.
a big emotional moment or a big action scene or a big something. If for some reason it's going to be important. And I make a list of those and then I start to arrange them in an order. And now an outline will just grow from that seed into like a I think 9-page single spaced monster. And that's like when I know that I'm ready to start writing.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah. When you're like going at it and we're starting to plot out these scenes, have you ever had a time where the characters went a completely opposite direction than how you had written in your 9-page outline?
Yeah, I mean, sort of. So they don't usually like one thing that will happen is that I believe that I've set up some kind of climactic or emotional thing, and I actually haven't done a very good job of it. So I'll have to go back and like shore up some of those weaknesses. And sometimes it changes the outcome. So like I hit a point in Chosen Ones, which was my pandemic book, but I hit a point where I realized that my whole like I never figured out what my antagonist wanted. And I was like, that's
Hmm.
so huge. Like I don't know how I got to that point without figuring that out. I do have like a little bit of a villain problem. You know, I have to work really hard on them. So um anyway, I had to stop for like 3 days with my husband, who's good at brainstorming, and just like work out all kinds of things like alternate universes and villain motivations and a bunch of world building holes. Like I don't know what happened with the outline there, but I got better at outlining after that.
So wait, if villains are the hardest for you to write, which character is the easiest? Like what archetype?
Oh, I think just the hero usually. Like I don't write the story if I don't know what they want,
Mhm.
or what kind of arc I want them to have. So they're always the ones who like I wouldn't be writing the story if I didn't understand them. So I think that's why they're the easiest for me.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Mm.
It's so different for everyone with that. I've known people who've hated the hero, and like for me, when I start writing, I know the hero too well, so I can't figure out those things because it's like
Oh,
I just have to
interesting.
intuit this part. So I like the side characters because then you can have more fun and tinker with it.
Yeah, I've that's interesting. I my side characters all start out the same. They're like
Oh yeah.
always slightly funny, just gently amusing. I'm not like I can't write comedy really, but and then I have to like make them different. Like I don't know why they just all come out as the same person. So that's like a thing that happens with while writing the rough draft, but I don't know. I'm a
Well,
real hero person. Even when watching TV, there's always like the side couple that everybody ends up loving more than the main guys. I've always been a main guy kind of person.
so what do you do to differentiate your main guys from each other?
I try to have them relate to each other in different ways. So, you have a character walk into a scene and you um, maybe have everything work out in a straightforward way. Like, hero needs something, side character gives it to them, end of scene. And then it'll feel boring. So then I'll have maybe like the character come in and be antagonistic instead. Maybe there's an obstacle. Maybe they can't come together or they don't want to cooperate. I try and like add friction. Is my first instinct, which is the one that I have to kind of constantly disregard, is to have everything go perfectly smoothly. And I
Mhm.
don't know why. And so creating like rough spots for myself is how characters come into being.
Yes. Yeah, it's that I've experienced this too, where it's you want to get to that end point so badly that you just go straight there. And it's like,
Yeah,
oh
but you
wait,
have to make yourself earn it.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
totally. So, being a writer in these genre spaces, what interested you about that, about dystopias and fantasies and all of this?
Well, I think the first thing that attracted me to them when I was a kid, and I was always interested in science fiction and fantasy as a kid, was a little bit of an escape. I was like the youngest of three kids, and there was some, tumult in the family, and I was just like a lonely, weird child. So
Mhm.
I think the escape was really appealing, but it's not just, I hate just calling it escapist because I don't think that's actually the function that science fiction and fantasy serve. I think they actually just give us like a layer of distance. Um, and we can use that distance to like safely encounter challenging ideas and people and emotions. So I think for me as a kid, it was like I can go into my like emotional state, but there's also like ray guns and
Mhm.
spaceships and aliens involved. Like there was just that playfulness that's like kind of baked into the genre that made it feel safe. Um, so I think for me, it serves those two functions very nicely. It's like it offers you a way out of reality, but it also offers you a way back in.
Absolutely, absolutely. Can you share some of your favorite stories from the genres that you write in?
Yeah, so when I was a kid, it was all Animorphs by K.A. Applegate. Did you ever read those books?
I
They're
don't think I
dark.
read them, but I saw them a lot. Like in every they were like next to the books that I was reading at the
Yeah,
library
there's
at
like
least.
100 of them or more. And they're about like an alien invasion with these like slug creatures that crawl into your ear and take over your brain, and you don't know if this is
Awesome.
happening to the people around you or not. So very dark for a children's series. So that was kind of like the first one I can remember getting into. And then I read Ender's Game and A Wrinkle in Time, and Harry Potter and what else did I read? Oh, I read Dune by Frank Herbert when I was too young to know a lot of what I was reading in Dune. Um,
I think that's the best time to read books though.
yeah,
When
and
you're
then you read them
not,
again as an adult, like, oh,
yeah, like when you're not quite ready for it, you read it, then you can come back around to it, and it feels like like more like you earned it that way, at least for me.
yeah. Um, and it's a big achievement when you're young to read something that's like above your technical age
Mm.
level. It feels like it's confidence building. It's nice. Um, I read Sabriel by Garth Nix. Those books, the Porcelain books, they're really good. Um, so yeah, I think one of the reasons I ended up writing YA is because a lot of the books I have the most positive associations with are in that sort of rough age category, although it didn't exist in the same way when I was young. So,
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So, kind of piggybacking off of that question, are there any books you've read in the more recent years that were so good they changed your writing after you've already been a writer?
huh, that's a great question. Hold on. Sorry, my nose is really itchy.
It's
It's great for the
I've
podcast.
I'm a mess over here with my with my sinuses, so
Yes. What changed my writing? There's a book called Blue Ticket by Sophie McIntosh that I read a couple years ago. I was actually assigned to review it by the New York Times, so I was like afraid of it. Like I better have a smart opinion about this, and I was like prepared to be critical. And then I read it, and it was just so excellent that I was like, okay, well, this is just going to be a really like a rave review, which I think is how it turned out. But it was it changed my prose again. So I don't some people have like a really beautiful and poetic way of writing, which is lovely. Um, I don't like naturally have that. I'm way more of a straightforward prose person. But Blue Ticket is written with very kind of like direct language, but is incredibly beautiful. The like on a sentence level, really beautiful. So I think it gave me a lot of clarity about how I could work my way toward that because I'm always trying to grow. That's my main focus as a writer. Um, and it was one of the books that kind of showed me a path. One day I aspire Um, so that's probably a good, more recent example. But also, I really love George Saunders. So it's not really science fiction and fantasy, but he writes with a lot of humor, and just a really strong voice and a very strange and vulgar like world building style kind of. He does sometimes write like more genre fiction type things, or like strange surreal things. So he's he's helped me to reading like his work has helped me to think about like ways to grow as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. I've got some books that I need to go read right now. Those sound so good, but
Yeah, George Saunders is more of a short story guy, so I would recommend 10th of December. It's his
ooh,
collection. Very good.
okay. I
Hmm.
will check that out for sure. Kind of, so you mentioned world building with him. That was a question I wanted to ask you. How do you build your worlds?
Oh, well, I'm not like like I don't have like a secret encyclopedia somewhere. I'm not one of those people. God bless him. That sounds amazing. I don't like draw maps. Every piece of world building I do, I like have to make myself do because the story will require it at some point. So for me, it's just like a constant um, it's like an expanding toolbox. So I'll
Hmm.
start off with like a hammer in a box, like there's really nothing there. And then as I go, I realize I have to stop and like add a screwdriver and a ruler and some nails and all that stuff. So that's kind of my approach. I start off with like a kind of like a concept, like just the basic kind of scaffolding for where something is set. And then I'm just like adding layers as I go.
So for this new novella, what was your beginning? Like what was that? What was the hammer?
Man, I've had a hard time even remembering where When Among Crows started. But that's what you're asking about, right? When Among
Yeah,
Crows.
yeah.
Okay, well, maybe I should explain When Among Crows to start. So When Among Crows is set in contemporary Chicago, but
Hmm.
there's like a creature underworld, and they're mostly creatures from Polish folklore, which is significant in Chicago. I mean, partly it's significant for me because I am the child of Polish immigrants. Well, one Polish immigrant, my dad's German, but um, and also, Chicago is a really Polish place. It's like
Hmm.
got the highest population of Polish people outside of Poland, apparently. So my grandfather was always really excited that we lived here. He lives in here. He lived in New York.
I'm in Chicago too, and
How
our
are you?
neighborhood. I'm outside of it. Our neighborhood has a lot of Polish people in it also. Like it's yes, absolutely, like confirming. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's pretty cool. I learned a lot when researching this book. So I learned that most of the Polish immigrants who used to live in the city have now like left and they're all in the suburbs now.
Hmm.
So which is funny. But anyway, so the story is set there and it's about a somewhat mysterious man who is looking for the wizard, basically. Baba Yaga is the wizard in this case. So it's a little bit of a Wizard of Oz story. And he kind of like accumulates this like small group of people, and they're all trying to help each other find Baba Yaga, who lives in Chicago. And they form kind of like strong bonds over the course of one day, and encounter a lot of danger. So that's what When Among Crows is roughly about.
Hmm.
And I wasn't supposed to write it. I had a whole other thing planned. I had an outline. It was approved by my publisher. It was going to be like a futuristic Greek tragedy retelling, just like the last novella I wrote. Um, and I was walking a lot in that time, like through the streets of my neighborhood. And I think I wanted the world to feel more magical, kind of. Just like, remember when a book could make you feel like everywhere you looked, like in every closet or behind every door, there was like something else, something that if you just look carefully, like you can see it. That's kind of the wonderful thing about contemporary fantasy to me. So I wanted to
So
do that.
beautiful. Yeah.
So that's where it came from. I don't know. I was like, what could I do? And then I was also playing The Witcher,
Hmm.
somewhat less romantically. I was playing The Witcher, which has a lot of Polish folklore and Slavic folklore in it. And I was like, hey, this is really cool. Like these creatures are dark and they all seem like vampires, even if they're technically not. And I don't know. There's just something like very special about how brutal Slavic fantasy can be in terms of like, it's about like someone will go through a tragedy and then it turns them into a monster. It's just like adding insult to injury a little bit, but I kind of like that about it. It's an interesting characteristic.
I love mythology so much, like any mythology. I was a Percy Jackson kid, so it was that for me. But I love so much of it, and that's one of my favorite things of that genre. That I feel like the way the gods or whatever monsters, whoever's running things, it's so brutal. So many of these traditional stories and these fairy tales, and that element gets brushed past in a lot of retellings, and when it's there, it makes my like history heart so happy because it's so essential to it.
Yeah, there's a kind of expectation that we have probably because of, being in a more Christian dominated culture that like God will be just and merciful. And the old mythology is like, I feel like an attempt to explain why things are so unfair,
Yeah.
which is like, well, the gods do what they want, which I think is very interesting. So obviously feels a little foreign to us now, but it makes a certain kind of sense.
Well, what did your research process look like for this book, finding those mythological stories and what to include, what not to include?
Well, it's a little bit difficult to research Slavic folklore if you don't speak any of the languages, which I do not. So, and I also felt this very intense pressure to do right by my family, So, I did just a lot of like online research. I always go to JSTOR. I translated a lot of web pages from Polish into English, imperfectly with the Google Translate feature. Thankful for that. And I bought a bunch of books too. So I just kind of searched them for things that felt like they went together. So there are a lot of like wronged women who become monsters in Slavic folklore, kind of like I mentioned earlier. And I really liked that idea of, if we had like an underworld of creatures from Polish folklore, they would probably be mostly women. And um, and that was kind of like a jumping off point. Ironically, two of the main characters of this book are men, which is just how it happened. But the underworld itself is like this kind of matriarchal system, which I thought was really cool. But yeah, I didn't include everything. Obviously, like anytime you kind of adapt mythology for a story, you take a lot of liberties. But I just looked for what I found most compelling, I think.
That is amazing. Well, I've had a fantastic time chatting with you today, and like this has just been so excellent. I just have one last question, and that's what do you have coming up?
Well, One Among Crows is my next novella, the Polish folklore one. It comes out in May, so that's really the only thing I have on the docket right now, which is exciting.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, anyone listening to this, please go get One Among Crows and all of the other books that you have written because all sound so fantastic. Yeah, for Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
And I'm Veronica Roth.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The
end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.